Thank you very much for coming today. I'm attorney Gloria Allred. I'll be making a statement, and then after I make the statement, one of our clients who is a victim of the Dr. George Tyndall in USC, who will be known as Jane Doe 48, and who is seated to my left, she will be making a statement. After that, Congressperson Karen Bass will be making a statement. Actually, Alejandra, will be making a statement as the third person to make it, and then Congressperson Bass. And after that, of course, we'll open it up for questions. And Alejandra will introduce those who are standing behind us from the union. This week, the LA Times published an important article about Rick Caruso's 7-hour deposition, which was taken in the lawsuit brought by many sexual assault victims of Dr. George Tyndall, who was for many years an OBGYN doctor who examined students at the University of Southern California, USC. I read this article with interest because my law firm and I represented 72 victims of Dr. Tyndall and USC in the lawsuit, and a number of them in the criminal justice process. In addition, I supported the students in their protests at USC. Throughout this litigation, many of my clients expressed to me that a major goal in pursuing justice in this case was for them to learn why USC failed to protect them after the school was given notice of complaints from students that Dr. Tyndall was conducting himself during medical examinations of students in ways that were inappropriate and worse. Victims wanted and deserved answers to their important questions from the school that they loved and on which they relied to tell them the truth. Many were encouraged when Rick Caruso, who was on the Board of Trustees at USC and became the president of the board, promised that there would be an investigation by O'Melveny and Myers, the law firm, and that when it was completed, it would be released to the public and to the victims. He raised the hopes of victims who simply wanted the truth, but then he cruelly broke his promise to them later, leaving many of them feeling betrayed by him and the university that he represented. Our clients want answers from Rick Caruso, not broken promises. Mr. Caruso should have taken and should still take steps to assure that this report is released. Let's examine the excuse that Mr. Caruso expected the victims to believe for why the investigative report would not be released to them. The LA Times report stated that Caruso alleged, quote, that the decision was based on concern about victims, end quote. Experts, he has said, quote, told the trustees that the details could re-traumatize Tyndall's patients, end quote. If re-traumatizing victims was the true reason for hiding the report from the victims, why did USC never give that reason directly to the victims? Learning the truth would have helped many victims to heal. If some might have been re-traumatized by it, they could have decided for themselves if they should read it or not. It is not for Mr. Caruso to patronize victims and make that decision for them. They, not Mr. Caruso, should have the right to decide if they want to read the report. We never have, nor ever would, ask Mr. Caruso to protect victims from the truth. Mr. Caruso was simply trying to side with victims with the hope that it would advance his political career and help him to get elected as mayor of Los Angeles. We know this old political trick, and that is why we are calling him out today. We do not need a mayor who leaves behind him a trail of broken promises and a number of victims who are further traumatized by his double talk. His apology does not help. If he was truly apologetic, then he should have taken steps to release the report, which he had promised the victims would be released. Mr. Caruso has spent countless millions trying to sell himself to the voters of Los Angeles. Yes, money matters, but the truth matters even more. Victims matter. Promises matter. This election matters. It is time for Karen Bass, a woman who has advocated for USC's investigative report to be released to victims, to be elected as mayor of Los Angeles. And now I would like to introduce one of our very brave clients, and she is Jane Doe, 48.
Okay. All the mics good?
Yes.
Everybody happy?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning. I am one of Tyndall's original victims. I'm also, more than 30 years later, a highly experienced trauma therapist. So I come to this with a deep understanding of the impact of his and USC's actions. It was 1989 when, at just 17 years old and trying to be a responsible grown-up, I went to the USC Student Health Center for my first well woman exam. It was awful, but I didn't have the information to understand what was happening. He implied, and I believed, that I was the problem. I couldn't relax enough. Even when the news broke a few years ago, I questioned my own experience. If what he did was so bad, how and why would the university keep him on for so many years, exposing thousands of other women to likely harm? It just didn't make sense, and yet that's exactly what happened. Even though, as president of the USC Board of Trustees, Rick Caruso promised all of us transparency and accountability around Tyndall's crimes, he has continued to refuse to release the information USC gained through its independent investigation. Under his leadership, USC had the opportunity to be an example of robust and honest accountability, but instead doubled down on hiding the truth at the expense of students and alumni. Why does this matter? Because having information helps survivors. Not understanding or being able to make sense of a significant experience is in itself distressing. Knowing how and why and by whom decisions were made to help will help Tyndall's many victims have a little more clarity and possibly open space for more healing. Right now, Los Angeles is being rocked by the exposure of our ongoing betrayal by public servants from City Hall to the Sheriff's Department. We need leadership that will own up to mistakes, share information, and make real amends. Rick Caruso cites his handling of the Tyndall scandal as an example of his leadership, and perhaps it is, but what does that mean? For me, a USC Tyndall survivor, it means that he is more interested in covering up for friends and associates and protecting powerful institutions than he is in upholding transparency and accountability for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'm going to ask, would you take this seat? And Alejandra, you sit right there.
Yeah.
I'd like you to be next to the representative. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Alejandra Valles, and I'm the Secretary Treasurer for SCIU USWW, and I'm here with a group of janitors who are trauma-informed and who have been raped on the night shift. Today we are here to tell Rick Caruso, ya basta.
Ya basta.
Ya basta.
Anybody who has done work with survivors, anybody who is trauma-informed knows that trauma-informed action starts with survivors' agency. It starts and it begins with what survivors want: to hide behind experts, to hide in order to protect his friends and his allies is unacceptable. This is why we are here today to say that Rick Caruso, it's not fitted or deserves to be the next mayor of Los Angeles. We are here today to stand in solidarity with the great women, Gloria, and with Karen Bass, and with the survivors who have spoken up and who have said ya basta. And we are here to say that only Karen Bass has what it takes, has the proven track record, and is honest, knows what trauma-informed is, has led the city, and has led with conviction and perseverance. With that, I would like to introduce Congresswoman and the next mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass.
I'm going to move it. Why don't we move the microphone, put you in the center.
Okay.
You can be right here. No, see. We'll put the congressperson over here. And before the congressperson speaks, I would just like to also just introduce my partner, my law partner of many decades, the wonderful Dolores Leal, who has been one of the lead attorneys for our 72 victims of USC and got a terrific result for them in their lawsuit. Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. Good afternoon, and let me just thank Ms. Allred and her firm for always being a fighter, a tireless fighter for women in our city and frankly, in our nation. To the survivors joining us today, your courage is remarkable, and we thank you for continuing to demand justice so that the powerful no longer escape accountability. It brings me no joy to be here today, but the stakes in this election are too high, and the Los Angeles Times has revealed that Rick Caruso led the cover-up of sexual assaults of hundreds of USC students and has repeatedly lied about it during this campaign to protect himself. He promised a full investigation and then broke that promise. On the campaign trail, he has been asked repeatedly about why he won't release the investigation and has come up with a patronizing answer about the truth being too much for the survivors to handle. I think about you as a trauma-informed specialist, being the one to say that is not what survivors need, especially if the survivors themselves have asked for something different. It's insulting enough, but now we know his answer, given in interviews and given on the debate stage, has been a flat-out lie. The LA Times reported, quote, in his testimony, Caruso offered a different explanation. He said that after O'Melveny's lawyers laid out their conclusions in private presentations to him, that the legal team advised the board not to release the information. It's clear that he says one thing on the campaign trail and says very different things behind closed doors and under oath. Under oath, Rick Caruso was asked whether USC sexual assault victims would ever know who was responsible for attacking them. The answer was, quote, based on the advice of counsel, as we've talked about, I can't release the information. I'm sorry. Sorry just doesn't cut it. Rick Caruso knows the truth. He must stop lying, stop the cover-up, and come clean about how he sat on and chaired a board and failed to protect the women from being sexually assaulted at USC Health Center campus. According to the LA Times, with more than half a dozen lawyers monitoring his testimony, he evoked attorney-client privilege over and over again. Rick Caruso has a lot of questions to answer, and he should not be allowed to hide behind his lawyers and secret depositions any longer. He's running for mayor. He is asking for the people's trust and vote. He needs to come clean. He needs to be held accountable. He continues to choose protecting the powerful over protecting women and uncovering the truth. Those values have no place in City Hall, especially today. Rick Caruso could have stood up for truth and justice, but in his own words under oath, he said that he was acting according to business best operating practices when choosing to cover up the truth, not operating under the concern for the survivors. We are talking about sexual assault. We're talking about survivors and truth and justice and healing. He is talking about business best operating practice. This is shameful. It is proven that the cover-up was all about protecting himself, even if it denied the survivors the truth, healing, and recovering. He had a choice, and he chose to protect the powerful instead of women seeking truth. In doing so, he revealed the truth about himself. When he has a choice, he will put the interest of the powerful over the people. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to be taking questions. I just want to note that we will give you a copy immediately upon adjourning the press conference of Jane Doe 48's statement and my statement as well. We are going to be taking questions at this time. We ask that out of respect for the many, many victims of the USC scandal and the fact that they have not been provided with the copy of the report, that you focus your questions and only ask questions about the subject of this press conference today. We don't want them to be just a footnote and have questions about anything else. You're certainly welcome to ask anything else after the press conference is over to whomever you're going to ask it to, but at this press conference we're only focusing on what we talked about at this press conference. We appreciate you respecting it. Okay. Would you please identify yourself?
Yeah, Matt Hamilton with the LA Times.
Oh, okay.
It's a question for you, Ms. Allred, and you, Dolores. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
The deposition was sealed under a protective order that both parties negotiated. Why was there no mechanism for transparency in the settlement that you negotiated for your clients?
Well, all I can say is there were numerous attorneys involved in negotiating the settlement from numerous firms, and that was not part of the settlement. But look, the settlement has been finalized.
Yeah.
So at this point, there is no reason why Rick Caruso couldn't urge the trustees to release it. Okay, so this advice of counsel, well, I think that's rather weak. He's a lawyer himself. He knows that. You know, I think it's a little, you know, I don't know if how he says that with a straight face. At this point, whatever excuses they've given, whatever justifications, phony or real, that they've given, they could release the report. So let's place the blame and the finger of blame pointed to the people who could release it still, now, immediately. And that's Rick Caruso and the USC Board of Trustees.
Josh Haskell, ABC7, a question for Congresswoman Bass and Ms. Allred. So your campaign has repeatedly said that Rick Caruso failed to protect women. Do you have any proof, evidence of something specifically in the report that would damage Mr. Caruso, that would hurt his run for mayor, something that he did? Like, what specifically is in the report that you want released so bad?
I have no idea what's in the report. The point is that a commitment was made to survivors to release the report, and then that commitment was backtracked, and his reason for not releasing it I found to be insulting and patronizing to the victims. They should know themselves whether it's going to be traumatizing, and as the lady here said, she's a trauma specialist. If you don't want to see it, you just don't have to see it.
Yeah.
It's an individual choice.
And I asked Mr. Caruso yesterday why he invoked attorney-client privilege so many times. He said, I was just following the advice of my lawyers. Why do you think that that's just sort of a cover-up?
In other words, are you saying that I'm just following orders was his excuse? You know, years ago, and I'm sure that especially many of our union sisters who are here today will remember that women were protected out of jobs, like at night in restaurants, because they were told it was for their own good. They might end up getting raped in the parking lot if they parked in a dark parking lot at night. Of course, the wages were higher, the tips were higher in restaurants that serve at night. And, you know, ultimately the courts found that protective labor laws, which protected women out of their right to work, had to be struck down. So I'm really very tired as a women's rights attorney of certain people like Mr. Caruso trying to protect women who didn't ask to be protected from the truth. They want to know the truth. They're adults. The question is, why can't he handle the truth? Thank you.
Craig Figner with KNX. To both of you, I mean, we're at this point in the campaign where Bass and yourself want this, Caruso to urge this to be released. And at the same time, we have your college application from USC that you've not released in full as you pledged to in the KNX debate. So are we just at a point in the campaigns where politics are what they are and people have dug in?
You know, with all due respect to your question, I know you're tying it to the victims, and you don't have a right to ask any question you want. We'd appreciate it if that question could be after the press conference, because we want to focus on the victims at USC. But thank you for your question. Go ahead.
I have two questions. One, legally, I'm not an attorney, I'm Gary Karasik with LA Progressive. Is Mr. Caruso obligated because his lawyers advise him not to speak? Is he obligated not to speak, or can he disregard the advice of his attorneys?
He's the client, so
Go ahead.
Mr. Caruso was the client, and clients can follow or disregard their attorney's advice. And the litigation is over. The civil litigation is over. There's a settlement. So I would suggest that at this point in time, the report should be disclosed.
Is there any mechanism for, just to follow up to that, is there a mechanism eventually for any kind of freedom of information request to get that released?
Well, all I can say is I'm sure the press can, through its lawyers, determine what options it has, if any, through freedom of information to get the report released. We'd like to see it.
One more question, everyone. Just one more.
I still, for Jane Doe, 48. Mm-hmm. Could you give a more precise definition of trauma-informed, please?
Oh. Thank you.
Well, there are, you know, I could talk about it all day, but we don't have that much time. In brief, it's an approach that includes what we know about how trauma affects people and what people who've experienced difficult things need. And one of the things that people need is information and choice, agency over what they choose to do, what they choose to take in as information, how they choose to do that is part of taking back control of one's own situation. And so trauma-informed approaches to anything include that awareness and integrate that awareness into one's approach. That's
all right. Thank you so much.
Just one question. Thanks, everybody. Representative Bass, I'm curious, you represented USC in Congress, a lot of Tyndall victims were your constituents. You know, while you're in Congress, what have you done to further transparency and accountability for Dr. Tyndall's victims at USC?
What have I done in Congress?
Well, to further the interests of accountability and transparency.
I don't know if I don't know that there's an appropriate congressional response to this.
Well, they get a lot of taxpayer funding. There's an oversight mechanism of Congress, investigations, and the bully pulpit as well. So,
I don't think that there was a congressional response in this matter.
I know, could you have initiated one?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody for coming.